SA.
Over the weekend, many of you might have caught Fred Fleitz, Senior Vice President, Center for Security Policy, appearing on various Fox programs, detailing some of his background knowledge as a former CIA analyst about the terrorist attack in London and other issues, and we're always glad to have Fred join us. Fred, welcome aboard again, sir.
Good to be here, Larry.
I want to jump into some of your remarks, but before I do, I'd like to get your reflection on Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, all announcing they're going to withdraw their diplomatic staff from Qatar and basically accusing Qatar of backing terrorism, cutting their ties with it. And we've got some 10,000 U.S. forces at a military base in Qatar.
It's a complicated question, but Qatar has been backing the Muslim Brotherhood. It is too close to Iran. And I think Donald Trump basically gave them cover to send a message to Qatar that if it doesn't change its ways, these regional states are not going to work with them. And, of course, Qatar also is where Al Jazeera is located. And I've had the misfortune of doing a few Al Jazeera interviews, and, man, they are just incredibly biased. I was very happy when their U.S. branch went off the air. It was such a piece of propaganda, but it's still out there.
Did you think your message was getting out on that channel while you were trying to make your points?
Well, I was in Al Jazeera America, and nobody around here gets that. I don't know where it appears. And it was like, bashing my head against a brick wall. They didn't care what I had to say, and it was stacked with, it was worse than CNN. Let's put it that way.
Whoa. Well, of course, the president has basically provided a $300 billion arms deal to Saudis, and does that suggest that they gave them kind of an impetus to go ahead and show some reaction at Qatar? But again, we've got 10,000 troops there. I mean, as you said, this is a very complicated issue.
Yeah, we have a major air base there. It's very complicated, and we have to have a good relationship with all these states, including Qatar. But Qatar, and Qatar, it's a complicated situation because half of the natural gas reserves from Qatar are offshore, and they own half of them, and the Iranians own half of them, and there's a relationship where both states can tap into these reserves peacefully, which you have to do when you're drawing from a common energy resource like this. So they have reasons for wanting to work with the Iranians, but they've simply been too close to them in the eyes of many experts.
All right. Well, let's see where that develops. I did note that Secretary of State Tillerson suddenly rushed in and was urging these nations to work out their differences. I'm thinking, well, it's almost like we're speaking on both sides of our mouth again. And we want to fight against terrorism, if that's what Qatar's doing, and these other Arab nations are going to help in that fight, or is it more a Sunni Shia issue, or is it terrorism, or is it just a ploy? Is it just a charade?
I don't think breaking relations was the right move, frankly. I understand their frustration, but I don't think we should be driving Qatar into the arms of the Iranians either. As I said, it's complicated. These regional states are very upset. First of all, Qatar also has a reputation of thinking they are superior to all of its neighbors, and they try to strike peace agreements that frankly make no sense in a variety of situations, and I think they've drawn the resentment of the royal families of most of the local countries.
You're listening to Fred Fleitz, Senior Vice President, Center for Security Policy, serving decades as a CIA analyst and also working with Congress at various points. And I have in front of me here some of your remarks you made regarding the London Bridge terrorist attack, and I read a quote from you before we came to you, and that is, "We may have generations of radical Islamists in the UK unless the British government wakes up." Your floor, sir.
I want to talk about that, but I want to raise something else. I had the privilege of meeting with Missouri Senator Roy Blunt in the green room in Fox. He is such an impressive guy. I knew him on the House Intelligence Committee when I was on the staff. He's now on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Missouri is so lucky to have someone with such an incredible grasp of national security and radical Islam. He was on Fox News Sunday, which is really the premier Fox show. Anyway, I just wanted to put a plug in for him. I don't know him other than I've sat behind him, but I figured you'd want to know that.
I've covered him for decades, of course, both prior to becoming senator, and actually, along with a substitute co-host I use from time to time, Colonel Jack Jackson, who has a jet. Colonel Jackson asked me to fly co-pilot with him a couple times while he was flying Blunt around the state in the primary last year, and then again the day of the general election. So had a lot of extra time to spend with Senator Blunt, and I second all your remarks about him, sir.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. We exchanged stories, and I mean, he made my presentation better because I was able to talk to him, and I gave him some ideas. But my concern about the UK, and there's lots of things we have to look at. You know, was there a slip up for security or intelligence? Can we increase security? We have to work closer with the Muslim community. The thing I'm focusing on is the failure to assimilate large numbers of British Muslims who are being pressured to be separate from the rest of British society. Radical Islamists are seizing upon this to push the radical ideology, to push hatred of a country that accepted these refugees from conflict areas, and I'm afraid to radicalize some of these Muslims to commit acts of terror.
I have no doubt. And in fact, apparently some inside those communities were alerting authorities about some of these guys, that they're trying to radicalize their children on the playgrounds. And one of them apparently appeared in some documentary about ISIS attacks. And it all went unchecked because I think maybe more political correctness.
Well, you know, I'm glad you said that because there are many good Muslims in the Muslim community who try to do the right thing. They have tried to report radicals in their midst who they think are a threat. But I think the long-term threat is this separate society. Do you know there actually is a system of Sharia courts in the UK, a separate judicial system? This is basically pushing a separateness that is based on an ideology that is at war with Western civilization. And I think among the things the British government has to do, shut down the Sharia law courts and do more to incorporate this group of individuals, this group of British Muslims into British society.
You know what's going to happen, though, if they do? Oh, you're going to encourage them to attack. They'll be coming after us as if they're not already.
I mean, look, free people have the right to if they want to have an enclave. Well, there's the Amish in Pennsylvania. There's other groups like that. That's one thing. But when they separate in a way that threatens the rest of society, that's something that we can't tolerate. There has to be a way to bring them into British society, and I mean, and that's happening to some degree here. There are enclaves of Muslims in Minnesota and in Michigan that are raising some concerns in this country. It's a trend that has to stop.
So you have the London mayor who's a Muslim, and he has been telling his folks he's doing everything and that London's one of the safest global cities of the world, despite 2 terrorist attacks this year so far. And Donald Trump took him on some remarks and did incorrectly quote him, stating that he had said there is no reason for alarm, and he was basically saying there's no cause for alarm with the additional troops on the street. But I say, yeah, if you've got additional troops on your streets where you never did before, there is cause for concern, or however you want to parse the words, in your citizens.
Well, you know, whether the president misquoted him or not, the mayor of London has consistently played down the risk of radical Islam. He is I'll just put it charitably, he's in denial, but I think it's more than that. He knows the threat, and he's just not going to admit to it. So I don't know if denial is the right way of putting it.
Well, he shows up at the memorials, he says all the right things and so forth, but I keep saying, why is he not exhorting the Muslim community to step forward, start naming and bringing folks to justice inside the community? That's something, as a Muslim leader, the mayor of London, he could do that no one else could. And he may talk all the talk, but he's not pushing the extra button.
That's exactly right. I mean, if Zuhdi Jasser was mayor of the city of London, we know what he would be saying.
Yeah.
We know there are moderate Muslims, there are Muslim reformers who recognize this threat and want to bring their faith into modernity. And I think that's the solution. And that's not something we're going to hear from the mayor of London.
I have another piece that you'd passed along to me that was written by John Moody, FoxNews.com, folks. This was written June 3rd after the attack. And he's quoting another member of your Center for Security Policy, your president, Frank Gaffney, stating, "My view is that we're no longer facing random acts of terrorism. We have reached a tipping point. This is now an insurgency."
Yeah, I'm proud to work for Frank Gaffney. He's the president of the Center for Security Policy, a former Defense Department official. We're a nonprofit. You can find our website, securefreedom.org. And Frank's calling it, this is not a random act of terrorism. This is an insurgency. This is an attack by an insurgency that is at war with modern society and wants to destroy it and replace it with Sharia law. And the fact that John Moody, who is the executive vice president of Fox, he basically quoted only Frank in describing this issue. It's a really a must-read piece on the it's on the Center for Security Policy website, securefreedom.org. It's also on Fox News Opinion.
And it pointed out in this piece that British government officials estimate there's some 20,000 jihadists living among the population. Not 20,000 jihadists. And their message, we hate you, we want to kill you.
There's 3,000 on a watch list. There's 20,000 persons of interest in the UK. There's about 760 British citizens who traveled to Iraq and Syria to fight for ISIS, and more than half of them are believed to have returned to the UK. Think about that.
Frank Gaffney also is quoted as saying Shias and Sunnis have had serious differences for centuries, but what we're seeing now is a global alliance. They are perfectly capable of making common cause to take down the West, and I think it will get worse before it gets better.
You know, that's an important point because there have been reports. There's a lot of people who say that Sunnis and Shias don't work with each other and Al-Qaeda is not cooperating with Iran. We know there is an Al-Qaeda cell that is operated out of Tehran and actually tried to stage a bombing of a train going from Canada to New York a few years ago. We know these groups collaborate against what they consider the great enemy, Western civilization and the United States.
I have to ask you, when the mayor of London is saying that it's one of the safest global cities in the world, and they had the attack on the Westminster Bridge in March, simply a vehicle, driving rapidly across the bridge, right up on the sidewalk, striking and killing people, then jumping out, stabbing, and then, of course, we had this other one. After the Westminster Bridge thing, no one did anything to start putting barricades along those sidewalks until now, after a second event. That did not take a big thought process that could have been exercised the first time, and we would not have had what we just saw at the London Bridge.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Larry, but frankly, where does it end? Where do we stop the security perimeter? You know,
I agree.
Right, we could have protected that. They would just attack somewhere else.
I do agree with that. I fully agree. But, I mean, when you've already seen one major thoroughfare that's well known throughout the world and it's used as an avenue of murder and homicide, a terrorist act, I should point out. I also noted, before you join us, there are numerous restaurants I go to around this area. I'm sure you do in some of your areas. I assume, and many in D.C. still, they don't have the so-called bollards or whatever put up around them to prevent a car crashing in either by accident, by drunkenness, or suicidal jihadists.
That's right, but I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time, and I mean, there are barriers around so many federal buildings and congressional buildings, and this is all because of 9/11. It's just incredible how many streets are closed off, how many barriers that are in place to stop vehicles from crashing into a federal building and running people down. But in a free society, this is going to be a risk. We have to go to the root causes here, the ideology, and in the UK, basically people who are trying to form their own society that is at war with the British way of life.
Two final questions. An MSNBC anchor over the weekend after the attack posed a ridiculous question. Is there any risk of overreaction?
You know, I mean, can the anchors on MSNBC, I mean, basically they go after new low after new low. They'd rather talk about Russia collaboration with Trump rather than this serious security issue. I just think it's an embarrassment. And
still another one, a different MSNBC anchor was asking, is Donald Trump trying to provoke a domestic terrorist act by his tweets in order to prove himself right about Islamic terrorism?
Yeah, it's idiotic. There was a similar story on the front page of the Washington Post today. They'd rather criticize Trump than talk about this terrible terrorist incident and what caused it and how it can be prevented. I mean, talk about fake news. This is worse than fake news.
I did not see a lot of the coverage following the latest attack. But in the March attack, I watched a lot of the coverage at night, and the major mainstream media networks, and we're talking about CNN, MSNBC, so they were basically being interrupted by their stuff about Comey and the Russia. They had to, we got to go cover the Westminster Bridge thing, but let's quickly get back to this other subject. They basically were sanitizing it and just trying to move past it. They did not want to acknowledge. They did it to the minimal extent they had to.
Yeah, they're doing a disservice to the American people. They're not interested in reporting the news. They're interested in promoting a political agenda. They want to destroy the president. And it's a shame because there's a real threat to our security out there, and MSNBC and CNN, they're just not interested in providing honest coverage.
Fred, as always, we thank you. And, folks, you can always check out Fred Fleitz with the Center for Security Policy and the articles he referred to, and also you'll see him a lot on Fox News and other places. No longer on the Al Jazeera network because it's gone. But we'll have him back here. Fred, as always, we appreciate it, sir.
Good to be here. Thanks, Larry.
You bet. Fred Fleitz, Senior Vice President, Center for Security Policy.